This is Endless Horizons, a Gaslamp, steampunk serial by Leland Artra, Book 1, Impossible Paradise, created by text-to-audio technology.
Chapter 9. Inedit, 16th, 14-3-4-3, day 126. Those silly ropes are slowing you down too much, Nunti said in her high-pitched, snipping voice, reminding Rainbow of the small, noisy dogs high-station men like to carry around all day. The illusion was enhanced by the fact that she was shorter than any woman he'd ever met, but it ended there. He was sure she could toss him 10 feet if she wanted to, in spite of being old enough to be his grandmother. At first, he'd tried to match Nunti's climbing abilities as she easily spidered up the cliffs. After almost falling 50 feet, he'd settled for using the style he knew best: ropes, pulleys, and a steady hand. Nunti wouldn't let him use pitons. This mountain was sacred grounds, and they were not allowed to damage it. They'd compromised. Nunti would climb ahead of them and secure the pulleys to let them climb. The only problem was her definition of secured, and his seemed to differ by about 1,000 miles. A fact he reminded himself he shouldn't mention again as he glanced at the pulley he'd just used, that was wedged between two rocks and jiggled as he pulled himself over the lip. "You've said that already, ma'am," he grunted at her. "No, I didn't." She dropped down, grabbing the cliff next to him. Her long gray braid of hair bounced and swung in the wind. Nose to nose with him, she looked into his eyes. Her eyes were a silvery blue, and as deep as this mountain was tall. "I said you'd make me visit the crown twice if you used the ropes. I just got back from the crown. So I was right. Today I visit twice. You may be touched by the sky as much as the ocean, but I'm a skywalker." "Ma'am, you're a wonderful guide, but if you don't mind, I'd like to survive this day." Rainbow grabbed a stable rock and finished pulling himself up onto the ledge. Tossing the rope back down, he braced to help Ardley make the ascent with something more secure than a dangling pulley. Nunti said, perching next to him and leaning out to look down the vertigo-inducing 100-foot cliff face. "He moves better than you." She picked at her white teeth with a dirty fingernail. Rainbow laughed. "He is younger, you know." "Ha! I've grandkids older than you that climb better. Your people don't skywalk," she said as she fiddled with something in her pouch. He knew she was baiting him, so he shook his head instead of getting into another debate with her. She was always probing them for information on their empire and ways. Only she used sly humor and careful wit to get to it. He knew it, and he knew that she knew he knew it too. When he didn't answer, she went down the cliff vertically to chatter at Ardley, encouraging him to move faster. Keeping Ardley's safety line taut required little thought. Rainbow's attention took the free moment to take in the sights. The view was already amazing, only 2/3 of the way to the summit. The ocean air carried the fragrance of thousands of native flowers up from the dark green belt next to crystal blue waters. Below them, the Vibrius stood on a simple dry dock made from the iron-like tall trees that grew here. The gray and white ship looked like the iris of a giant cat's eye in the middle of a blue water bay. Captain Rainbow knew the Vibrius too well. Even from this distance, he could discern torn iron plating. The mighty ship's sleek lines marred like an old sailor who's been too liberal with the mug and too tight with his pride. The Canilius, as the natives were called, were far more advanced than he'd expected. They lived in grass huts, wore textiles made of plant fibers, ate a diet of fresh fruits and fish. Yet they also made the finest glasswork he'd ever seen, understood the making of iron, and were able to build furnaces out of mud bricks, capable of smelting metal parts needed to patch the ship. A grunt brought his attention back to Ardley. With a last pull, the two men were sat comfortably on the narrow ledge. Nunti strolled around a corner towards them on a ribbon of the ledge as if walking on a park promenade. "Eat," she said, holding out 2 handfuls of some brownish lumps. "What is that?" Ardley asked, taking his half. "Kanashasa's hair. Eat." She pushed the remaining handful into Rainbow's hand. Ardley and Rainbow exchanged nervous glances. "Eat, eat. It is only good fresh." She reached up with a hand and pulled herself above them. "There's a baby's path above you. We'll reach Kanashasa's crown soon." Ardley put the substance in his mouth and chewed. His face remained neutral as he looked pointedly at Rainbow. I don't suppose I could pull rank and say no? Rainvo muttered. Not here, sir. The brown substance was spongy and smelled earthy. Rainvo cautiously put it in his mouth and chewed. A thick juice mixed with his saliva, and the flavor wasn't as bad as he expected. Kinda like chewing on a rag soaked in molasses, he said to Ardley. Ardley pulled out his leather water bottle. Not the most delicious thing I've had here. He took a long drink. The route Nunti called a baby's path was yet another example of how far apart their definitions for some words were. The path they took consisted of a narrow crevasse traversal and a chimney climb to the top. That was followed by a set of switchback ledges with no place to properly brace. Empresses bless me, Ardley said, standing and looking at the sweeping view. Empresses and Kanishasa bless us both, Rainvo agreed. The summit was surmounted by a set of 20-foot-wide spikes that jutted up 30 feet at an angle. With Nunti's permission, they were able to crawl up them to stand on almost level platforms with a 360-degree view of the islands and ocean. Where are the edge falls? Ardley asked. I'm not sure. I thought we'd be able to see them from here, Rainvo said as he pulled the cloth-wrapped hand telescope Lady Janali had given him before they'd left Ventali from his bag. Ardley had the brass climbing altimeter out and was writing in his journal. How high are we? Approximately 17,550 feet. Rainvo stood and looked through the telescope. 6 smaller islands surrounded the largest island of Keneally they stood on. What is that? Nunti said, jumping through the free air to land like a dancer on the spur they stood on. This is a telescope. It uses glass to make distant objects easier to see. Nunti held out her hand. Rainvo considered saying no. But they were only here by the blessing of the chief oracle called the matriarch of the island. She'd allowed them to come under direct supervision of a good skywalker. They were told to follow every direction Nunti gave them to ensure they didn't anger Kanishasa. He reluctantly handed it over. Nunti took it and looked through it. After fiddling with it for a bit, she figured out how to focus it, and then started jumping up and down like a little girl. I like, she said over and over. She was jumping up and down so close to the edge, Rainvo started worrying she wasn't paying attention. He began to walk towards her when she turned facing northwest and walked right past him to stop on the opposite side of the small platform, her toes dangling in the open air. Oh, she said, handing it back. Her shoulders were drooping a little. What's wrong? Rainvo asked, looking in the same direction through the telescope. I thought I might be the first since the great shaking made Kanishasa flee Monacia to see the misty cliffs of steel. There was only an ocean to the northwest, but there was a slight brownish-gray haze that signaled land to his trained eye. The what? Ardley asked. When the world was being destroyed by the forces of gray, Kanishasa brought our peoples here to be safe. The oldest stories say we came from there, where there are great cliffs of steel stretching into the sky. Kanishasa chose the first skywalkers to protect the sands before she left. Did all your people speak Ventalian then? Rainvo asked. It's not Ventalian, I've told you. The skywalkers speak the eternal language. We keep it true. So what is the other language? Ardley prompted. That is the language of our people. The people keep that true. She turned and stepped off the edge. Rainvo ran over and saw she'd only fallen a few yards to land on a narrow ledge. She waved. Be back. I smell something good. Rainvo stood for a time just gazing at the blue oceans, green islands, and bright sky. Ardley had sat at the edge and was looking at the other islands. It is beautiful, sir. Yes, it is. We've found an impossible paradise. Pulling the telescope back to his eye, he scanned the horizons. Ardley, Rainvo said, handing the telescope to the commander. Do you see anything? Ardley took his time looking all around. Finally, he stopped and handed the telescope back. Well, there might be land northwest where Nunti was looking for it, but nothing at all. I don't understand. Where is the edge of the world? Rainvo looked back towards their homeland. I know we didn't pass it. In the distance with the telescope, there was a black spot on the white line of the horizon. Get the directional stand, your journal and compass out. We have work to do. He laid down to prop his arms against the ground while holding the telescope steady. Ardley pulled the gear out. "What do you see?" "I think it's Mount Terret." "Captain, that's not possible. Mount Terret has to be over 10,000 miles away." "Closer to 15,000, I'd say, without the navigational charts. But it's also more than 5 miles tall. Help me take some readings." "Captain, is it even possible to see that far?" "I don't know. It's a fixed spot. It might just be another island mountain. We won't know unless we try and set a course for it. And to do that—" He stopped pointedly looking at Ardley, who was gazing toward the spot even though it wasn't visible without the telescope. "All right," Ardley said, jumping into motion again and setting up the cartography equipment they'd brought to map the islands with. With the small three-legged stand, they took a reading on the black dot. Then they recorded the general shape and topography of the surrounding islands and packed the equipment away. With nothing remaining to do, they sat, each with his own thoughts. Ardley elbowed Rainbow, getting his attention. "Nunti is coming back, and I don't like that grin. She's found something we're going to have to taste." Chapter 10. Charludit 8th, 14.3.4.3, Day 180. Although late, the Vibrius made it to the original trade ports as he worked his way back into the Ventali imperial waters. The sun was just bringing light to the day when the familiar coastline of Vental came into view. Cheers went up on the bridge that carried out across the decks. All of the crew rushed topside to take in the sweet sight and smell of home. "We've done it." Rainbow patted Ardley on the shoulder. Lieutenant Metallo stepped over. "We'll make the outer port marker in a couple of hours, sir." "Splendid, Lieutenant. Make sure everything is ready," he ordered. "What are we going to tell them when they ask where we've been?" Commander Ardley asked quietly. "I'm not entirely sure. We'll need to chart a careful course on that subject." Ardley didn't answer, so Rainbow glanced back. The commander stood, his eyes fixed on the distant landmarks of the capital city. His face was tense, and his brows bunched together as he stood arms crossed. "Lady Janali will be able to sort out this mess," Rainbow reassured Ardley. "Helm, take us in, 1/4 speed when we reach the outer marker." "Aye, Captain," the helmsman said. Ardley finally relaxed. "You know, I think she will at that." He opened the communication tube to the engine room and blew hard. "Engine room, we are approaching Vental. Prepare for port in 2 hours." Maybe they'll believe us. Maybe they won't. That doesn't matter, 'cause Mistress Janali will know the truth of it, and I'll bet you a month's salary she'll even have an idea or two on what to do about it. "No bet here, sir," Ardley commented. Captain Rainbow chuckled as he grabbed his cap and fixed it in place. Slipping his sea coat on against the chilled winter morning, he stepped out of the bridge to smell the clean, salty air of home. The skies continued to lighten as the winter day dawned. Lieutenant Metallo stepped up next to him. "Sir, it feels amazing to be back. Without you we—" "What is that?" Metallo pointed upwards. In the western sky near the center of the impressive cluster of bright stars that were the western sky domain of Star Empress's Gwennaduiana, a shimmering light 3 or 4 times brighter than any other star flared brilliantly. Its disk just wide enough his thumb could hide it. "I don't know." "Maybe the Star Empresses are signaling our return. Considering where we've been and what that might mean, they were clearly with us on this voyage." Rainbow's mind turned to all the good men that died on this voyage, and he couldn't bring himself to agree. The Vibrius's engines vibrated the deck below him as he regarded the bright new star. The starlight finished flaring and settled down to a dazzling new point of light. The new star was at least twice as bright as any other in the western sky. Perhaps, Metallo, perhaps. He prayed the new light was the Star Empresses celebrating the return of the Vibrius. But at the same time, it had looked too much like an explosion, and the hair on the back of his neck was standing tall. He knew in his gut something was wrong about that new light in the sky. Chapter 11. Epilogue. There you have it. That's the story of the suitor voyage of the Vibrius.
Sir, what about the second voyage of the Vibrius? And you didn't talk about the Canarium's voyages?
Ma'am, I've told you my story. Those are Lady Janali's stories.
Want more? Go to reamstories.com/endless horizons to get early access to more of the Endless Horizons adventures. Before you go, please rate, review, and comment on these chapters. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for listening. These audio readings are produced with text-to-audio technology to keep costs down. Want to support producing these with greater frequency and eventually using voice actors? There are two options. One, and my personal favorite, to support the writing, editing, and audio production, get early access to draft stories, and participate in the amazing community of listeners and fans of these serials, please go to reamstories.com/endless horizons and subscribe. Or, two, to specifically support just audio production of these serials, please go to patreon.com/LARTRA and become an audio production patron. The subscription model helps sustain the serial writing projects and all their associated costs. Again, thank you for listening.